welcome back to another episode of Deep Quotes. It's D.
I'm App.
And I'm Pod.
And we have a screenshot on the screen right now, and because this is a long quote, but it's also a terrifying quote. It comes from the official London Metropolitan Police page talking about what is a hate crime. It is not there anymore because after people started, actually reading the content that was posted, they freaked out and were like, "What's wrong with you people?" So they changed it slightly, but the sentiment is still there. But regardless, this was posted on the Metropolitan Police website under the official definition of what a hate crime is. And the specific section that we're going to read is hate crimes and hate incidents. Quote, "If someone commits a criminal offense and the victim or anyone else believes it was motivated by prejudice or hate, we class this as a hate crime. It means the offender can be charged for the crime itself and also their reasons for doing it. If someone does something that isn't a criminal offense, but the victim or anyone else believes it was motivated by prejudice or hate, we would class this as a hate incident. Though what the perpetrator has done may not be against the law, their reasons for doing it are. This means it may be possible to charge them with an offense." Please, have at it.
I mean, the first thought that comes to mind is thought police.
Because they're not charging you for a crime. They're charging you for motivations behind actions, which is thought.
Correct. And I think that there is something to be said when you're talking about the crime side of it, when you are doing a crime in the name of hate.
So let's start with that. Let's say that there actually is a crime involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good place to start then.
Because that's the first half of this.
Yeah, and I think that the reason why there is something to be said there is more that it's kind of the difference between murdering somebody because you specifically have a grief with that particular person versus murdering someone just because.
Sure.
And hate crime would fall more under that just because bucket,
and
which we tend to treat a little bit more severely because it's like this person didn't do anything to you.
And I can understand the sentiment behind why it's important. The motive is important. If let's say there's a particular black person that I really don't like. Let's say I kill that black person because I don't like him in particular. Mm-hmm. And it can be established like he did something to me that gave me a reason that I just lost my mind and killed him. Mm-hmm. I would be punished for that. If I killed him just because he was black, that is a very different type of crime because he didn't do anything to me necessarily.
Right.
And so while the end result is still the same, a person is dead, the fact that I killed him because he was black, that would come across as I may repeat the action against other people just because they're black and not because they transgressed against me. And that is a dangerous thing. And so I think motive in the context of a hate crime or a crime in general is important to take into account based on specifically what is their likelihood of repeating the action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think in the crime world that there is some validity to at least having a definition of a hate crime. I don't think that should make something that's not a crime into a crime.
Right.
I just think it should come down into sentencing of like, oh, we're going to give you the maximum instead of the minimum or somewhere in the middle because of hate.
Now, the other concerning part of this is if the victim or anyone else believes it was motivated by prejudice or hate. So it's not just the person that was being perpetrated against. It's some random other person believing it to be so. Mm-hmm. That is not objective. It's not even necessarily related to the crime. If I see someone punch someone, if I have in my mind that every white person hates every black person, and I see a white person and a black person get into a fight, I may believe that white person just hates black people, and I can then say that was actually a hate crime, regardless of whether or not of who instigated. It may have been a self-defense scenario.
Right.
In either direction. That other person doesn't know, and the fact that they believe it has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with what the truth actually is.
Right. And in today's society, there will always be someone like that.
There will always be someone that believes something, no matter how ridiculous. And saying that on the police website that another person's belief into a crime that they are unrelated to is just so mind-bogglingly moronic, because it's trying to codify that hearsay and third-person hearsay is admissible as evidence against someone in the form of a crime.
So, I mean, I think that the piece there is that if in the way that it actually is handled is that, okay, we think that this could have been hate motivated. As part of the rest of the trial, we are going to look into that and see and sort of make
And
a
do further
determination
investigation? Sure.
on that as a
that's
separate
reasonable.
charge that basically is a modifier charge.
Sure.
That makes sense.
But what they're saying here is
yeah,
if they believe it to be motivated by prejudice or hate, we class this as a hate crime. It's not we will do further investigation. It's no. That makes it any crime classified as a hate crime if someone out there randomly believes that it was hateful.
So it's probably going to make everything a hate crime at that rate.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
could just very easily walk into the courthouse and be like, give me a list of all of your active cases. I think this one was a hate crime because I believe it. So therefore, it must be true.
I have seen,
Yeah.
and particularly if you're an argument from authority, let's say that you've studied racism. And you say, I've seen a lot of racism out there, a lot of white people being racist against black people. And I use that example because it's an easy example to point to. A lot of white people hating black people. Oh, this is a crime that was a white person against a black person. Statistically speaking, it was probably hateful. And I'm an authority on the subject, so this was probably a hate crime. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean it was a hate crime.
Mm-hmm.
You may want to investigate it if there are statistical possibilities or likelihoods that it was a hate crime, but that doesn't make it a hate crime.
Exactly. But according to this quote,
Yeah,
it would be.
but this isn't that isn't even the concerning part of this quote. It's the
Yeah.
second half. Can we move to that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to read this again. If someone does something that isn't a criminal offense, but the victim or anyone else believes it was motivated by prejudice or hate, we would class this as a hate incident, though what the perpetrator has done may not be against the law. Their reasons for doing it are, this means it may be possible to charge them with an offense. Holy crap.
So, like, I think the type of thing that they're thinking about here would be somebody writing on the pollen on someone's car offensive slurs.
In some countries, that is illegal. In
Yeah.
the UK, that actually is illegal.
Okay. But, like, that's the type of thing that I think that they're thinking about, and they're not taking into consideration, like, okay, but what if I tip a server $100 and someone decides that, oh, you think that the server can't pay their bill? That means that you're prejudiced against this person.
Right.
Therefore,
Yes.
This just seems like a very weird thing to get mad at somebody
You
about.
could,
Yeah.
and there are people that if you're excessively generous to someone, you could view that as, someone could view that as looking down upon that person of, oh, you need my money because you're inferior to me. And so you can attribute someone's race superiority to being generous to that person.
Mm-hmm.
And while that generosity is not a crime, according to the London Metropolitan Police page, you could be charged with an offense for being generous and giving someone money if some other random person happens to believe that you did it out of spite or hate or prejudice or difference, that if you were generous to them just because of your prejudice that they are different, that is an offense. That is a legal offense, even if there's no crime whatsoever associated with it.
Which is
or
ridiculous.
I'm trying to think of other, like, common ones. Complimenting someone's little brother, thinking it's their son. Oops, I just assumed that the 16-year-old just had a little kid.
Or these two people look similar. Well, hey, your son is really well behaved. What are you talking about? That's not my kid.
Mm-hmm.
Are you just assuming that he's my kid because we both have the same skin color? That's
that-
really racist.
Or that
I'm
all
gonna charge
Asians
you.
look the same, therefore, like, this kid's not even anywhere related to me.
Right.
You must hate me.
Or,
By the way, not all Asians
or
look the
not even
same.
hateful, just prejudice that you're making assumptions, and prejudice can just be making assumptions. And so even when you're being complimentary, if you make any assumptions that someone interprets to be hateful or based on making the assumption based on a person's particular difference, that can be charged as an offense, as a hate incident. And by the way, when like these are written up, because I've seen write-ups of these types of things, the form that is filled out is a hate crime. and somewhere down a couple pages down or down on the page, it says non-crime.
That's ridiculous.
On the hate crime report, it says non-crime. It's like, so you're going to write up a report for hate crimes for something that someone did, regardless of whether or not that thing was illegal or even bad, because some random person interpreted it to be based on prejudice or the person's assumption of differences between two people involved. I'm losing track of even where I am in this argument, because the number of steps removed that you have to be to make this kind of a statement is ridiculous. It's multiple levels of hearsay that allow you to charge someone for literally any action, assuming that you have motive against them. If I have motive against someone, I can say, man, you are a really great person. I think you're doing it because you don't like other people, and you're just trying to cover up for the fact that you don't like other people. And because I believe that, I'm going to try and get the police to charge you with an offense. That's what this
Which is insane.
And this is their official definition of what a hate crime is on the police page.
Right. I'm just trying to imagine them enforcing this now.
I'm not even trying to imagine the enforcement. I'm trying to imagine what type of a mindset do you have to be in your primary definition of a hate crime, list this atrocity of a statement. What kind of a mindset do you have to be to put that up and not realize how horrific this is?
Well, they have to cover themselves because they need to cover that Count Dankula hiling.
Sure, and I think this
pug.
came out at a somewhat similar time with Count Dankula, but and maybe that's a better example that it's not illegal to do this, but what if your motivations were? And some people interpreted his motivations for those that aren't familiar, Count Dankula taught his pug how to do a Nazi salute, a pug doing a Nazi salute when he said, "Gas the Jews." And it's because he didn't like the pug, and it was his girlfriend's, and he wanted the pug to do something that would upset his girlfriend. But
She thought it was super cute.
But some people interpreted that as
not the hiling.
Yeah. So some people thought that he hates Jews, but the Jewish community, like multiple groups in the Jewish community, came out and said this is not offensive. He's not being hateful towards Jews. You shouldn't be prosecuting him. So the people that he could have been offensive against, seemed to agree and have that you can have people from all across the Jewish community have a consensus that no, this is not offensive. This was just a joke. And then other people unrelated to the crime are being offended on behalf of the Jewish community and saying, while it wasn't illegal, and while the people that it would be making fun of are not upset about this and don't want to prosecute it, I believe it's because this guy really hates Jews and it should be prosecuted. And he was prosecuted, and he was fined money for this. So if you're wondering how it's implemented,
right.
He went to court for well over a year, I believe. And he ended up being charged, I think it was like £1,000 or something. It's like, you don't think that this will actually happen, that, it's not crime, but they'll only focus on crimes. No. A dude taught his dog to do a Nazi salute for the purpose of a joke. That was prosecuted as a hate crime.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a hate crime.
Now, there's also another subtle aspect to this, that the first part of this quote that we didn't read off is defining what is a hate crime, which I think is important. There's two particular words that I want to bring to the attention. Official definition, according to the website, is a hate crime is when someone commits a crime against you because of your disability, gender identity, race, sexual orientation, religion, or any other perceived difference. And those last two words are what I want to bring up. Perceived difference. So you can have twins, but if someone believes that there's a slight difference between them, and those twins have an argument with each other, if they believe that it's because, that twin was born slightly earlier than that twin, I think that the second twin is just really jealous, and they're spiteful and hateful towards their other twin because of it, and they got into an argument. And so I think that this was a hate incident because it was out of jealousy. It's a perceived difference. It's all subjective. Everything about these definitions is subjective to a third party that is not related to the actual incident itself, regardless of whether or not it's crime. And it's like, This opens the door to prosecuting literally anyone for anything at any time accused by anyone. That's what this opens the door to.
Well, also, when you're looking at those types of groups and differentiators, that there are things that are considered politically correct one day that are considered politically incorrect the next day, with exactly no warning that we're going to change the language.
If a comedian makes fun of someone and then 7 years later it becomes illegal or becomes taboo, another person, not the one being made fun of, and let's say both the comedian and the person being made fun of both agree, yeah, okay, that joke was funny. A third party person can come in and say, man, I think that was hateful 7 years ago, and you can now prosecute for it.
Well, I was thinking more of like...
And by the way, that is happening. There are comedians, I think in Canada recently, a comedian made a joke about someone several years ago and is now being prosecuted for it. And it's because of this. It's because of laws or interpretations like this that you can prosecute anyone for anything just because anyone out there decided that I think that this was because they don't like a particular person, that I perceive a difference between the two of them, and I think that the reason that they felt this way was because of that difference.
Which is super dangerous.
Yeah. The direction I was going more towards was like, as an example, I know someone who has dwarfism, which is the terminology that I prefer to use because anything more than that changes day to day what's acceptable.
And it's a medical terminology.
Medical terminology. It is considered improper to refer to this person as a midget, which is totally acceptable. Like, I understand that is totally understandable to not want to call him that. Some people don't
because there is a derogatory context with the word midget.
Some people don't like to be called dwarfs. Some people do like to be called dwarfs. Other people like little people. Some people don't like being called little people. How do you know if you meet someone who has dwarfism what term that they themselves prefer to use? If you use the wrong one, oh, you must be hateful. You don't like, I like being called little people, so you can't call me a dwarf. How dare you? Or I like being called a dwarf. You called me little people. That's wrong.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily something you're going to ask them immediately. You might be referring to them as you see them out and about or something to your kids who are asking a question.
Or referring to them in third party of you're talking to someone else completely and saying, well, who is it? It's the guy with dwarfism. As a way of differentiating from other people. If the fact that you mention that is interpreted by that person as being out of hate or because I don't like people with dwarfism or they view it as a derogatory term, it's like, no, I'm trying to help identify the person based on what some of their characteristics are. The fact that I'm mentioning it in a medical sense does not make it hateful, regardless of whether or not you interpret it as being hateful. And I think that the only time that it should ever even be take into consideration is if a crime was committed and you have reason to believe that the sole reason or the main reason that that crime was committed was because of hate, and you actually have good reason to believe that, then you may want to take it into consideration when deciding the sentence. But it should not be sentenceable to have an action based off of a difference. If I act towards someone because they're different to me, if I act towards a woman because she's different to me because I'm male, if someone interprets that as hate, then I could be prosecuted, according to this statement. And they've very soon after they posted this, they slightly changed the wording, but still had the same sentiment. But they slightly changed the wording because they realized people were getting really upset with it, and they wanted to cover that up. And I think bringing it back to what you were saying, Pod, is that offensive language, or what is viewed as offensive language, can constantly change. Connotations to words can constantly change. And using those words does not mean that a crime has been committed. And it should not be prosecutable to use words and have the connotation change or the interpretation, various people's interpretation of them. Individuals do not get to decide what another individual can or can't say based on what that person the person listening particularly defines as being offensive, particularly when it's on behalf of another group. And that's the part that concerns me, is that if the people that could be offended are not offended by something, but someone completely unrelated to that is offended on their behalf, and that's prosecutable, no one will be able to say anything about any group. And we lose the ability to speak about differences between people. And if we can't speak about differences between people, how are we supposed to unite as a people through our differences? We need to be able to speak about differences, and we need to be able to speak about them freely, because if we're afraid that I'm talking to someone, having a great conversation with them, and if I'm worried about a third party overhearing that conversation and then trying to prosecute me legally because we're having a good conversation, which this quote opens up the door to and says, yeah, this is legal for us to prosecute, society will break down, and we can't bring ourselves together. We can't cross those barriers of differences between us if we can't talk about those differences without being worried about prosecution.
Yeah, I can see that.
Any other topics you guys want to add on to this?
I think you covered it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So once again, it's a long quote, but we're going to read through it again. On the London Metropolitan Police page, where they define what is a hate crime, if someone commits a criminal offense and the victim or anyone else believes it was motivated by prejudice or hate, we class this as a hate crime. It means the offender can be charged for the crime itself and also their reasons for doing it. If someone does something that isn't a criminal offense, but the victim or anyone else believes it was motivated by prejudice or hate, we would class this as a hate incident. Though what the perpetrator has done may not be against the law, their reasons for doing it are. This means it may be possible to charge them with an offense. Again, that was from the London Metropolitan Police hate crime page. So I think that's it. And thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next time.